Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Now I'm typically the person that doesn't talk about Christmas until after Thanksgiving, but Apple TV is not, because this Friday they released the movie Spirited, which I had the pleasure of seeing early. But that's what we're here to talk about today. I knew that Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds were coming out with a Christmas movie, but I didn't know much about this film before going into it. The synopsis is as follows. Each Christmas Eve, the ghost of Christmas Present selects one dark soul to be reformed by a visit from three spirits. But this season, he picked the wrong Scrooge. Clint Briggs turns the tables on his ghostly host until Present finds himself re-examining his own past, present, and future. So without further ado, let's get into the 6 things that make a movie great. 1. The plot. This movie follows most of the basic guidelines set by The Christmas Carol, but like the synopsis suggests, adds its own twist that ended up coming across pretty nicely on screen. Will Ferrell plays the ghost of Christmas Present, and instead of going with the one dark soul that his team suggests, he's taken aback by Clint Briggs and decides that he is the one that he wants to reform and try to turn his life around. But he slowly realizes that Briggs is actually impacting his own life more than he thought he would. To be completely honest, I feel like this movie really stumbled in the first 20 minutes. I felt like the story was a bit clunky, there were a lot of cheesy lines, could have been done a bit better. But once this movie started going and the plot started progressing, I found myself really enjoying it. I'm pretty particular when it comes to musicals, so I tried to not be critical of that aspect of it, but I liked the story that this journey took the audience on. Yeah, there were a lot of funny moments, but it also didn't shy away from some of the deeper, heavier moments that presented themselves multiple times in the film as well. And at the end of the day, you have a lighthearted musical comedy that has some pretty good messages throughout it. So for me, plot gets a thumbs up. 2 is family friendliness. Now, it wouldn't be a Will Ferrell or Ryan Reynolds film if it didn't have a bunch of crude language in it, would it? There's a mild bit of profanity, but there is quite a bit of crude language throughout the film. While you don't see anything sexual on screen, there are some sexual innuendos. In addition to that, there are a couple moments in this film where they tackle tough topics. Alliteration. That involve death and suicide. So those are things to be aware of before you go into this film. But for the most part, the subliminal messages in this film all point towards having integrity and being a good person, and that's something I can get behind. So with the caution on the crude language, I have to give family friendliness a 50-50. 3 is acting and script. I enjoyed all of the acting performances that we got to see. Both Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell played themselves, but they added a degree of depth that was pretty pleasant comparatively. I myself am not a huge Will Ferrell fan, but I liked his acting performance in this movie. Sunita Mani and Octavia Spencer both had great performances as well, and it was all complemented by a funny script. All of the dancing and blocking and choreography in this film were really well done, and the musical numbers and performances were forgettable, but really fun and energetic and funny. There weren't any standout vocal performances in this movie, but it sounded like all of the actors and actresses were actually singing their parts, which I think is pretty impressive. And I liked the scripted moments where this movie had a more serious tone, but it felt like they snapped out of those moments a little too quickly. And I get the desire to stay lighthearted, but I feel like they could have lingered on those moments a little bit longer, and it would have been just enough for those moments to have more meaning than they did. Other than that, I have no qualms. I found myself laughing quite a bit throughout the film, after the first 20 minutes of course, and enjoyed most of the character interactions. So for me, acting and script get a 50-50. 4 is character development. This movie focuses its character development where it needs to, which is with Clint Briggs and the ghost of Christmas Present. Octavia Spencer's character gets some minimal development, but this movie isn't really about her or anybody else. It's about the journey of Briggs and the ghost of Christmas Present. And not only do they get character progression throughout the film, but they give them just enough depth for you to understand why their characters are the way they are, and for you to empathize and sympathize with their different positions. I did feel like there were a couple moments in Briggs's character arc that were a bit forced, but even with that, I was satisfied at the very least with his character arc in the end. So although I enjoyed the character arcs, objectively, I have to give character development a 50-50. 5 is visuals and CGI. Some of the CGI in this movie is pretty obviously CGI, so it can look ridiculous at times, but it's not terrible. But other than that, it was great. There were multiple times throughout this film where it felt like you were actually watching a Broadway play, because the way that it was filmed looked like it was set up on an acting stage. And while that's not everyone's style, you can't deny that it's impressive what they're doing. So for me, visuals and CGI get a thumbs up. And 6 is rewatchability. There's a plethora of Christmas movies out there, and the question that you have to ask yourself is this movie going to be good enough that I add it to my traditional watch list for Christmas movies leading up to Christmas? Or is it going to be one of those ones that we skip over for a different one that's better? And honestly, with all things considered, I'd say yeah, it's worth watching again. It's not perfect by any means, but I thought it was a pretty well-made Christmas movie with a unique take on the Christmas Carol, and I ended up enjoying what I saw. So for me, rewatchability gets a thumbs up. With all these areas considered, I have to give Spirited an 8 out of 10. This movie really struggled in its first 20 minutes. The vocal performances were decent, and some of the serious moments didn't hit as hard as they could have in an attempt to have the film remain light and funny. But this movie had some great acting performances, it was light and funny, and at the end of the day, it gives you the same feelings and emotions that a lot of the uplifting Christmas movies you watch around this time of year do. So if you're a fan of musicals, Christmas, comedy, and Ryan Reynolds, I would definitely recommend checking out Spirited on Apple TV when it comes out this Friday. Thank you so much for watching. Once you watch Spirited, please let me know what you think about it in the comments below. As always, I appreciate your love and support, and I'll catch you guys and gals in the next one.